What's up guys, Anfield here. Welcome back to another video. Today's video we're talking about the Ranger succession that was just added to the global lab. Now obviously as a Ranger main of 3 years I have a great passion for the class, and so this is a very important subject to me. But keep in mind that everything we talk about could be subject to change. This is the global lab, this is the first introduction of the Ranger succession, so keep that in mind. It may be changed drastically before it's ever released to live servers, but we still want to talk about it, and I want to give my opinion. Now of course, I don't ever think that Prolibus is going to watch my video and think, oh, let's listen to this guy. Probably not, right? But at least let's talk about it and start a discussion about how the succession actually performs, the idea of the succession, and all the other things regarding the system itself. So before I get started on dissecting what Ranger succession is, I first think I should sort of talk about any inherent bias I might have against the system, and that's that I generally don't like the idea of it overall, and the reason for that is simply that I don't think that the Awakening is any kind of weakness in the combat system of BDO. I think it only strengthens BDO combat. I think it's what makes it so great is that you have this dynamic flow between the pre-Awakening and the Awakening. A lot of classes are very dominant towards their Awakening even after the absolute skills have been added, but Ranger is very much a perfect 50-50 mix, and I think that that's a real strength that should be maintained. I think that the succession system could work in a sense where you get to keep the current playstyle between the Awakening and pre-Awakening, but they did a system instead where you get to enhance either the Awakening or pre-Awakening. So essentially you choose between buffing up the pre-Awakening a bit more or buffing up the Awakening a bit more, and that's sort of your succession. You choose which one you want to enhance even further. I like that idea much more than here's a succession system which is a very slimmed down pre-Awakening skill tree. I don't like that because I think it dulls down the sense of advanced combat that the game can have. We already lost a lot of that where kits became much thinner in terms of usability when they did the 2018 class reworks, and I feel like this is just an even further step towards dumbing down classes. So that's my bias, but you know, before we start in terms of the succession system, but I don't think that it really influences what I saw when I tested the system, so let's get into that. So here's a look at the succession skill tree. This is the whole skill tree. You don't need to scroll any further. That is everything that is listed in the skill tree. Very, very small. This skill is a skill that apparently increases range, although I haven't figured out exactly what it's supposed to increase range on, because it definitely, in some cases, you have less range, such as on Descending Current, so I'm not sure which skill that does apply to. I guess we'll figure it out. That's basically the Awakening buff. It's Guardian, but not Guardian because it's the Succession, but it gives the exact same buff. Here you can see a 300 stamina buff, which would be nice, except there doesn't seem to be a skill that allows you to actually regen stamina. This is a ranged AP passive buff, which would be really nice on the current pre-Awakening skill tree, something useful for once for Ranger passive. This is Razor Wind, which is buffed in damage and also seems to have a forward guard added to it, which is one of the few skills that they actually did add protection to in the Succession skill tree. A nice change though for the class. Here you can see Tearing Arrow. The change to Tearing Arrow seems to be mostly that it does more damage. However, it does seem to be there's something wrong with it in the sense that it doesn't allow you to Penetrating Wind cancel with Evasive Shot. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Penetrating Wind just does more damage, which is nice because that is our nuke ability. So I'm all for more damage on that, I guess. Although generally I don't think Ranger's problem was ever damage, but there you go. This is Charging Wind. Previously, of course, we would only use Charging Wind for down smash with like Penetrating Wind cancels. This one, more damage, a lot more damage, so it's actually worth using to do damage, and has super armor, so that's quite interesting. So I think it only has super armor while you're charging it like that. And then Shotgun doesn't have any protection. I do think it should have forward guard like it did briefly in 2018. And it does more damage on some of the hits. Evasive Explosive Shot basically not changed, more damage. Blasting Gust the same, no protection or anything on that. Seems to operate relatively the same way as we're used to. However, they did change to adding a Ultimate Blasting Gust was like buffed up a lot. Previously, Rangers never used Ultimate Blasting Gust. It was a different mechanic to normal Blasting Gust, but now it functions somewhat in the same way as Archer's Full Bloom. So yeah. Descending Current was buffed up a ton in damage, however it seems to have lost quite a lot of range, and there's some buggy aspects with it when it comes to terrain, which I'll demonstrate later. However, purely based on the damage, it does seem like it would be the ranger go-to for siege, meaning that the succession system as it is right now would be the go-to for any sieging rangers, which good luck having to swap your skills every week. This is the 2 awakening skills you get to keep, Nature's Tremble and Regeneration. I don't agree with Nature's Tremble specifically. Regeneration is okay. Also, the key presses for them are really awkward, so you press S and C for Regeneration and W and C for Nature's Tremble. Really awkward key presses. Shift and left mouse button for Nature's Tremble was fine. I don't know why they changed that. And Regeneration should still be used from the hotbar. I'm not sure why they did that. So as you see, Blasting Gust looks pretty much the same as you're probably used to. So it did seem slower at first to me, but I think maybe that's just attack speed differences from the live server not having an alchemy stone and such. So yeah, it looks relatively the same. It functions the same as you might be used to. So the other change they did do, obviously, as I mentioned, was Blasting Gust Ultimate, which was changed to look more like Archer Full Bloom. So as you can see here, it does a ton of damage, and you can also flow shotgun out of the end of it, which is very interesting as well. So it's kind of a nice little flow cancel there between the 2 skills. And again, another reason I think shotgun should have forward guard is because it makes more sense and it flows really naturally. So here you can see the new charging wind as well as its animation. I think and there's a shotgun animation. I think that the animation team that made the skill effects did a really nice job. They look beautiful. So full credit to them. I just think that the actual skill tree itself is going to need some tweaks here and there. So the other thing that they changed without actually mentioning it with the succession was Call from the Sky. They added 2 things. The first thing is that instead of doing this, which was a high APM key press, they actually changed it to make it a much easier key press, and they allowed shotgun to flow straight out of Call from Sky, as you can see there if you press spacebar. This is a really nice change, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Again, why I think shotgun should have forward guard is because that would allow that to be a fully protected instant attack, and then you obviously would have to find a way to stay protected. So I think that's really good. But they did change Call from Sky to make it easier to key press, and that's basically you press W and right mouse button to use Call from Sky. Now, at first I was mad about this because it's more dumbing down to me in a sense, whereas before you had a high APM key press. However, when you start to flow in things like, oh well, if we're dealing with siege lag, it's quite hard to do that. With the lag, some of these cancels just don't work properly, and when you need something that's so fast and it doesn't respond, then you're not going to do anything, you're just going to shoot the ground. So I'm not as upset about that as I was initially. I guess it makes sense to have an easier key press for that skill. So as you can see there, that's a typical Tearing Arrow into Penetrating Wind. However, during further testing of Penetrating Wind Tearing Arrow cancel, it seems that there is an error preventing you from properly canceling the skill with Evasive Shot, which is usually possible with the Pre-Awakening skill tree. After doing some testing, it seems to me that Tearing Arrow is the problem on the Succession skill tree. Now, you could allow that to be untrained, possibly, although that definitely shouldn't be a thing that you need to do. I'm not sure what the problem is with it, but when I untrained it, it was far easier to do it and possible, where it wasn't really before. So that's definitely something that should be changed. What we want from the Succession is not less cancels, we want more cancels, such as the Call from Sky shotgun. That is an excellent example of something that should be added to the Succession. That's great. However, taking away some of the more complicated Penetrating Wind cancels, not so much. Okay, so touching upon grinding, because of course it's an important aspect of the game. Grinding, even with high gear scores, seems to be very problematic with the Succession system. There are a number of problems with it. So for example, these are obviously Manchums. I have 283 AP with Kudum, which is a lot. Manchums aren't exactly the tankiest mobs in the game or anything. But there seems to be big issues, starting off with Descending Current, which would normally be great for this kind of thing. You know, they buffed up the damage, so you think, great, I can now clear packs of Manchums with Descending Current. Well, that does sometimes work, but there seems to be big issues with terrain irregularities, the distance you have between mobs. This is something that urgently needs fixing, because it's not a PvE issue as well on its own, it's also a PvP issue, because obviously if you plan to use Succession for Siege because of Descending Current's improved damage and some other protections, this may happen to you. Terrain irregularities causing Descending Current to just do nothing. This is a huge problem that needs to be fixed urgently, because you don't see Blizzard or Meteor having these issues. It just seems to be Descending Current. So this needs to be fixed. I don't think it is a problem on current descending current, although current descending current obviously does no damage, so omega lol. But when it does work, it does do plenty of damage to these types of mobs. Obviously, again, these are Manshoms, 283 Kudum AP, so it should do a lot of damage. But yeah, it's great. But it does need to be fixed. Aside from that, some of the primary issues with the abilities seems to be that they just don't do enough damage. AoE is quite poor overall in the Pre-Awakening. Your primary AoE is Shotgun. And Shotgun is okay. It does okay damage, but obviously it's split between the amount of hits you're sending out. Different arrow hits of Shotgun are hitting different mobs. So that can be, you know, a little bit awkward to hit the mobs properly. I've tried a variety of different skills to try and AoE mobs down effectively, and there isn't really a great solution here, especially when trying to clear mob packs that you should be clearing quickly when Descending Current isn't working. But even when you're trying to clear higher tier mobs such as Augment and Hystria mobs, there isn't really a great answer. Razor Wind is currently a good skill to use you know, for high-end mobs when you're grinding Hystria, Star's End, Sakraya. Currently on the mixed skills of Pre-Awakening and Awakening. However, the Razor Wind that is here, which should be better because there's forward guard and more damage, is far slower than the current Razor Wind at Absolute, which is a little unusual. The other problem with it is while it's great that it doesn't use stamina, it doesn't allow you to regen stamina either, so it's not a useful skill for that. And I've found that while trying to grind with the succession system, since everything is stamina, you really cannot regen without stopping, physically stopping. You cannot regen your stamina. So obviously with the current Ranger you have Pre-Awakening and Awakening. Now the Awakening is predominantly mana based, whilst the Pre-Awakening is stamina based. So it allows you to swap back and forth depending on which resource you need. So that's great, but that doesn't really work in succession when pretty much everything is, you know, this current stamina overusage. So I'm not sure what they can do to fix that aside from changing some skills to be mana-based skills. So that would be great, but are they going to do that? I don't know. I would also argue that it was a missed opportunity to add Nature's Tremble to one of the skills, because I think if you're going to keep 2 Awakening skills, Nature's Tremble definitely should not be one of them. Nature's Tremble is a very weak skill considering what it's supposed to be. I mean, it's our long cooldown quote-unquote nuke ability, but its damage is truly pathetic compared to other comparable classes' skills at that level. So I think that keeping one of the most pathetic or underwhelming Awakening abilities isn't really what we wanted. I think regen is fine, although I think you could probably give regen forward guard, but I think it's fine to have regen. I think the other one should be different though. I'm not sure what the best option is. Perhaps maybe Vine Knot and allow you to use Heavenly Knot still, or perhaps even Waltz of Wind. I don't know. To be honest with you, I just think Nature's Tremble was just the wrong call there. There are other skills that maybe would have worked better, or in general they could have just made it the dash and just added mana to some of these Pre-Awakening abilities in the succession. I'm not sure. Either way, there needs to be some mana recovery because, yeah, it's not good as it is. So that's kind of my issue here with the Pre-Awakening, or sorry, the succession only grinding. It doesn't really make sense even on high AP, which means that you're gonna have to, as it currently stands, grind with the Pre-Awakening and Awakening, and then maybe swap to Succession on Siege, which means you're gonna need an Armstrong guide each week. And I'm trying to make an argument here for people to play only the Succession as an option, which is clear what Perlibus wants. I'm just saying that it doesn't work as it is, so it needs to be improved dramatically before it can be a standalone. This is actually viable to do in every aspect of the game. And I haven't even touched upon 1v1. This is purely grinding issues. And grinding is such a huge part of the game, right? You could maybe argue that I'd maybe take being not so great at 1v1 for being great at grinding and great at Siege. But you don't really want to be bad at grinding. I mean, current Ranger isn't great at grinding already, you know, unless you're really high AP, you're doing Star's End and Hystria. So that is not good to be bad at all kinds of grinding. I mean, you know, some spots, of course, when you're high enough AP, you just run around and you can descend in current. That's kind of okay, but you definitely don't want to be doing that, or you won't be able to do that at the higher end spots like Hystria. And to be honest with you, I don't see a way that you could grind in Sakraya without dying. I didn't test it, but I don't see how you would be able to grind that spot. So yeah, overall it needs a ton of improvement on this aspect. Most of it comes down to lack of consistent damage dealing abilities, as well as also mana sustain. So you know, arguably shotgun would be great, but of course, because it's split damage between the fact that when you fire a shotgun hit, it sends multiple different types of arrows. Now, it's great when you hit one target because then it does a big chunk of damage, but when you hit multiple targets, that's where the split damage comes in. It's not pure split damage like is commonly believed, it's split damage in the sense that you just hit so many targets, the arrows go in different hits, and so that's why you get split damage on shotgun. So this is, of course, something that needs to be addressed. But I overall, I mean, it looks pretty, but it's just not effective. So these are some of the cons I have with the pre-awakening succession idea overall, and why I thought it would have been better to be an augmented system on the current pre-awakening while still being able to use the awakening. The skill effects are very flashy, and they look really nice, so they did a really nice job on that. But as it currently stands, it is not a strong enough standalone. You can use it all the time. Like I said, the only real, I guess, solution I have is either to buff it up quite a bit by suggestions I've already made to the system where you're able to actually maintain your stamina by being able to use mana-based skills, as well as also giving us a little bit more consistent damage. Waltz of Wind would be perfect, honestly, because it's mana-based and also would be able to be consistently used when we're out of stamina. I think that would be okay, honestly. As for its 1v1 performance, it's very hard to say, but I would argue at the moment, based on the consumption of stamina and the stationary sort of aspect of a lot of the skills, it would be very, very difficult to win a lot of 1v1s in this way. This could be changed in a sense, but this is something that's a lot harder to argue because it's very hard to test 1v1s with this, especially while still getting used to it. Grinding is one thing, but trying to, like, you know, it takes a long time to be good at 1v1s in general on most classes that aren't that brain dead. So then to try and, like, sort of learn a whole new setup for it is not exactly that easy to really comment on it. But my initial thoughts would be that it would be quite poor due to the stationary aspect of it. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how it would sort of go. The Awakening allows you a lot more protection and allows you a lot more fluidity and movement as well. That allows you to chain more skills in a way that makes sense to catch other opponents. But this system, I think you would be too slow, too lumbering, too long in animation, and you'd just be out of stamina all the time. So I think that at the very least for 1v1, if they want to, they need to add a new iframe, because Ranger only works because you can swap between the dash and the pre-awakening iframe of evasive explosive shot. So definitely something that needs to be looked at. But if you're looking at the current system, it's not good enough as it is, and I hope that they do make changes. They did make changes to Warrior this week, so I'm hoping that they do the same to Ranger. So we'll see what they do. Hopefully the feedback from the Korean side is very good in terms of what needs to be changed here, because obviously it's doubtful they'll listen to the Western audience. Pearl Abyss only really seems to care what the Korean players think, which is worrisome for different reasons, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for listening to my sort of ramble about this. I hope you enjoyed at least watching some of the skill animations. They do look pretty nice. Definitely the best aspect of Succession is the new skill animations, but we'll see what actually happens. Till next time, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.